The author of Belichick, The Making of the Greatest Football Coach of All Time, and also the captain, The Journey of Derek Jeter. He is Ian O'Connor. How are you, Ian?
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. So I'll ask you the same first question I asked your colleague at ESPN, Seth Wickersham, yesterday, because he wrote that piece, as you all know, last year about Brady and Belichick and Jimmy G and all of that business with Kraft. Are you surprised that everything's hunky-dory and the Patriots are back in with Brady and Belichick together again, Ian?
I would say overall, no. As I watched them during the course of the season, Rich, I did think it was a relatively weak team by their standards, a thin roster, and you look at some of the losses they had, particularly on the road. Brady did look a little older. Edelman looked a little slower. Gronk, of course, looked beaten to hell half the time, and their defense wasn't very good. So, but at the end of my book, I wrote that after last year and the way that ended with the Malcolm Butler benching in the Super Bowl and the way some players responded after that in the offseason, and that Belichick had earned the benefit of the doubt that he would sort of win back this team and put them back in this position. So in that context, no. I would just say just watching the team like I did this year, either covering games or just from afar, it did not look like a Super Bowl team. You just can't be surprised at anything Belichick and Brady do.
I know, and then they blew the doors off of the so-called most complete team in the Chargers, and then beat Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. I'm just wondering if we've ever seen we've seen great coach-quarterback combinations. We've seen great coach-player combinations or manager-player combinations, Ian. But in terms of creating an environment and a scheme to win a particular game, that day's game, and the person who is the star player to execute the game plan, I don't think we've ever seen anything like Brady Belichick. I'm wondering what you would say to something like that.
I agree with that. I think it's the greatest partnership I've ever seen. I'm 54 years old. It's the greatest partnership I've ever seen in American sports. And just particularly given, as you know, the way the league is set up to prevent dynasties from happening, right? The schedule, the draft, free agency, the cap, everything is designed to prevent them from doing exactly what they've done since 2001. It's just amazing. Imagine being a Jets fan and just thinking of how long this has lasted, and they probably have a few more years left in them, which is just hard to believe that you're trying to get going with Sam Darnold as your franchise quarterback, and this could extend out another 3 years. So it's going to eat into that period. But no, I've never seen anything like it. And I covered the Yankee dynasty with Jeter and Mariano and Torre, and I think this one tops it by far. And I think that relationship, it unraveled temporarily last year, Belichick and Brady. But when you consider they've been working together every day under immense pressure, season after season for 19 years, for them to have only that one fracture that became public, that's pretty damn good.
And, Ian O'Connor here on the Rich Eisen Show. I said yesterday, and I gave out top 10 storylines for Super Bowl 53 that's going to be discussed by all of us in the media next week. I had the Kraft legacy up there as well. This the 10th Super Bowl for the Kraft family owning the Patriots. And I'm wondering what you might know of Kraft's role. And as you said, that Brady-Belichick relationship temporarily unraveling based on, again, Seth Wickersham's latest piece, which I'm assuming you took in on Jimmy Haslam and his style of management and how he would listen to everybody and he would it was like a constant state of entropy as opposed to Kraft. I'm wondering what you could tell me about Kraft's role in keeping this all together, best you can tell.
Well, first off, Rich, I think it's important to note that Kraft deserves a lot of credit over the years for managing his relationship with Belichick. I think there are a lot of owners in the NFL who could not have put up with Bill's daily quirks for as long as Kraft has, just to sort of manage that difficult personality at times. You look at Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson, they could have won more Super Bowls together, but Jones couldn't deal with Johnson and vice versa, and that ended way too soon. They could have been Belichick and Brady years ago. So you give Kraft credit on that front. I think what happened last year, Kraft and Brady have a very warm and affectionate relationship. And in some ways, at times, it's been Tom and Robert versus Bill. That came about a little bit last year. They live right near each other, Kraft and Brady. They're close friends, and that's the transformational relationship in the organization. Brady, Belichick, and Kraft, Belichick, those relationships have always been transactional. But Kraft did make it clear to Belichick last year that Tom Brady would retire a Patriot. He was not going to be traded, period, end of story, whether that was he wanted to play until age 44, 45, 46, whatever it was going to be, that he would retire a Patriot, and then Belichick acted off of that information. So I think overall they all had to survive that one very difficult period in time. They did survive it, maybe barely, and now they're back to a great functional working place and back to being the greatest dynasty ever.
Connor here on the Rich Eisen Show from ESPN. He wrote the book Belichick, The Making of the Greatest Football Coach of All Time, and we will get to Rivera and Jeter and the Yankees that you covered and wrote a book about as well in a second. I played on our television-only segment something that Chris Brockman picked up. I saw it through your Twitter feed, Chris, and we discussed it yesterday. Belichick breaking down video with Scott Zolak locally in New England and just hearing the X's and O's in his brilliant mind. And he's also a pretty damn good broadcaster as well. And he would be playfully chatting with Zolak. That's the guy, right? That we never get to see. Is that the guy, Ian?
Absolutely. And it is a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde act that he manages on a somewhat daily basis away from the facility. His friends and associates told me for the book that basically he's an entirely different human being. And he can be kind and warm and generous and even charming in social settings, all those things. And I think for most of America, that's very hard to fathom, just given the person that he plays in public settings, particularly in his press conferences. And I think that's strategic. I think he has always said we're in the business of collecting information, not sharing it. And so, therefore, when you ask me a question in a press conference, I'm going to give you as little information as possible and be as disagreeable as possible. In those settings with Scott Zolak and a few others, he opens up a little bit, and you get to see a little window on that soul, on that human soul that's there, that he really hides as well as anyone. And I know there are people that have known him for a long time, Rich, who really, I don't know if they've said this to him, if you told me this, they really wish he would humanize himself more so people could see that he is a complete human being and not that figure that you see all the time on the sideline or in press conferences. But at age 66, if he hasn't done it now, I don't think he'll do it anytime soon.
Yeah, Bill Belichick, coacher of champions. Hold on, let me get this right. Schemer of defense, breaker of tablets. That was one of my favorite moments of the AFC Championship game, Ian. You know what I'm talking about? When he got pissed. Yeah. I think when he's trying to show an illegal pick to the referee on one of the tablets and didn't get the answer he wanted from the refs, and he just took it out on the tablet. That was just all sorts of fantastic.
Yeah, I was in the press box at Arrowhead. That's not the first time he's done that to a tablet. Yeah, that was a good scene. And afterward, even just sort of watching him after his post-game press conference, and he was wheeling around his luggage, and he went out to the loading dock area, and he mingled with a couple of players and their family members and posed for a picture, chatted neighborly with a photographer, and that's sort of that human Bill that you don't see. It was just a little moment of it, but yeah, he is a complete person, and he is very capable of acts of common decency and grace, and too bad he doesn't show up more often.
I know, right? And what'd you make of Brady seeking out Mahomes, Ian, after the game?
I think that Brady certainly respects the game, and he sees a great young talent and respects that. And he knows where this kid is heading, and he knows he's going to have many more opportunities. And I think just walking out of that stadium, it was a big game for Andy Reid to lose, just based on his history with Belichick and just the fact that Andy hasn't won a ring yet, and he deserves one. He really does. He's been a great coach for a long time. But Mahomes is going to give them so many more chances over the next 12 to 15 years. He might become the next Brady, just a more athletic version of Tom. That's possible anyway. So I think that Brady respects historical figures and also the great young players who are going to take his place ultimately whenever he steps aside. I do think Brady does have another 3, 4, 5 years in him. I had a phone conversation with him in the spring of 2017 where we were talking about age 46 and 47, never mind 45.
No kidding.
Yeah. He did tell a friend before the Super Bowl last year that, you know what, if we win this, that's 3 out of 4 twice. I would have won 3 out of 4 Super Bowls early in my career and now, and that wouldn't be a bad way to walk away. but he didn't. Of course, he didn't win the game. He broke a record, but didn't win the game, and then he didn't walk away.
Right.
Although in the offseason, my sources told me he thought about it.
No kidding. So what do you think this time, win or lose? Ian, do you think it matters?
I think he's back. No, I think he'll come back. I do. I think if he wins, and I do think the greats think about this, even though basketball and football, apples and oranges, but Michael Jordan has 6. If Tom Brady wins, he has 6. If he gets to 7, boy, a lot of great athletes, whether it was Jeter or Kobe Bryant or Magic Johnson, they stopped at 5. If Brady's got a realistic shot at 7, why would he stop at 6? He's still playing at a high level. I think there's a chance he steps away, but I think he's got a lot more football to play.
I agree with you. I agree with you too, Ian. I agree with you. And it's interesting too. You want to talk about Brady? That if he wins this one, he will have gotten Warner and Goff. Okay, he would have gotten the Rams as St. Louis. He would have gotten the Rams as Los Angeles. He would have gotten Warner.
Right.
He would have gotten Warner. He would have gotten Goff. He would have gotten Donovan McNabb. And you could go down all the list. And obviously, we all know Peyton Manning did get past him a couple of times to get to the Super Bowl, but I think we can all safely say that Brady's gotten Peyton Manning. He's gotten pretty much everybody in the same way that Jordan got everybody, with the exception of obviously Nick Foles last year and Eli twice. What do you know?
Right.
What can you say, knowing New York sports as well as you do, Eli Manning's future with the Giants as we're sitting here on the outset of Super Bowl 53? Ian.
Well, I always thought one of 2 players would be starting under center on opening day next season for the Giants. That's either Eli Manning or Nick Foles. And so if they can get Foles, I do think that they might release Eli in March. Now, I don't think they really want to do that deep down. I think they would much rather Eli retire a Giant than actually release him, and I think those conversations would be had. But if they can't get Nick Foles, I think Eli's back. Now, I did write a column during the season, as much as I hated to say it, that I thought they should transition away from him now, just given how he's carried himself with great dignity and grace in the marketplace. But I think right now it's probably a better than 50-50 proposition that they don't get Foles and they come back with Eli and draft his successor in the upcoming draft. And basically it would be like 2004 all over again, where Kurt Warner was the placeholder,
right,
and Eli was the rookie, right? So I think this time Eli would be Kurt Warner, and they're going to draft, whether it's Haskins or Jones or somebody else, to be young Eli in 2004.
I don't know if the Eagles would, because they still have some control over this thing, let Foles go to the Giants. That's the one thing. I mean, as hunky-dory as it is right now and how much they love him and he loves the city and he loves playing there and it's a love fest, that's when the business of football would step in, I think, Ian.
You're probably right. I think they would much rather him go to Jacksonville.
Yeah.
or maybe they keep him and just figure it out somehow, some way. Now, last year, Belichick had a decision to make. He could have franchised Garoppolo. He could have kept both of them, but he decided not to do it. And ultimately, I think they made the right choice in keeping Brady, even though Garoppolo is much younger. Here, it's a really fascinating scenario. Obviously, they're going to go with Carson Wentz.
Right.
But it's hard to walk away from Nick Foles, the way he plays in big games. He really does remind me of just a younger Eli, where he's not going to be a long-term great quarterback, but he plays like a great quarterback in the biggest moments. Very difficult player to walk away from.
Ian O'Connor, a few more minutes left with Ian O'Connor of ESPN. And it's interesting that you mentioned that the Eagles would prefer if he goes to Jacksonville. That's kind of like, it reminds me of the old Steinbrenner way of taking everybody and sending them to Seattle to make sure that they don't come and haunt the Yankees, or just as far away as they, to just send everybody to Seattle. And that brings me up to a story that Joe Torre told me when we had him on the day after Mariano got into the Hall of Fame unanimously, first ever, that when Torre arrived in 96, he said Mariano was kind of like a spare part, and that there was, because Jeter was struggling in 96 spring training, the conversation was to trade Rivera to Seattle for Felix Fermin as a stopgap and keep Jeter in the minors, Ian. I'd never heard that before. Did you?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, they had a big meeting about both of those players and stories, and yeah, it was possible that Mariano was going to Seattle. If you remember, Showalter in that '95 series against Seattle could have used Mariano more than he did and later regretted it. Just didn't know exactly what he had. And really, I don't think anybody realized Rivera was going to develop into the greatest closer of all time. But if Showalter had used him more in that series, maybe the Yankees win it, and he keeps his job. But Jeter was almost demoted in the spring. They were having discussions about that. A couple of people went to bat for him. I think the late, great Gene Michael was one.
Stick.
And I think Gene Michael, if I remember correctly, said to Steinbrenner, listen, we talked about Jeter struggling as a young player, and we were going to stick with him. Why are we having this conversation now? And ultimately, Stick and others in that room prevailed, and Jeter stayed on the team and went north with the Yankees to New York, and the rest is history. So those stories are absolutely true.
What's your favorite Rivera story, Ian? You got one?
I think his farewell season is one of the nicest, most decent things I've ever seen a professional athlete do, where he did a farewell tour in basically every ballpark, and he set this up in advance. He wanted to sit down before games and meet with people who were vendors, who were janitors, who were people in ballparks who most players probably never gave a second thought to, right? And he just wanted to hear their stories and connect with them and say thank you for making this game and this incredible sport possible. This is one of the best ideas I've ever seen. He executed it. I wrote a column about it. And the people that he touched were really, it's an hour or two that they'll never forget the rest of their lives. It meant so much to them that somebody of his stature cared about them and took an hour or two out before a series or before a game to just say, hey, thank you so much for what you contributed to the game of baseball. And that's why ultimately not one person could bring himself or herself to not vote for Mariano going into the Hall of Fame. I thought for sure somebody, Rich, would say,
me too.
I'm not going to allow a closer to be, or a reliever to be the first 100% inductee into Cooperstown. But his grace, I think, just won everyone over, and that's why he made history.
Yeah, Jeter's next, though, next year. Do you think, and we all know, outside playing field influences sometimes rear on a voting card. Do you think what's going on with Jeter in Miami, or somebody thinks that Jeter's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, that he won't get in unanimous, or you think he's going to be the next unanimous guy next year? Ian?
I think he'll be unanimous. I think there's a chance that, listen, outside of New York, a lot of people always felt he was slightly overrated because of the New York marketplace and the teams he played on. Defensively, at times, he struggled. It's possible one or two people might not vote for him, but I think Mariano going in at 100% is going to help Jeter do the same thing. And listen, at the end of the day, you look at the 5 rings, the only Yankee to get 3,000 hits. How do you not vote for Derek Jeter?
I know.
I understand you could have said the same thing about everyone from Babe Ruth through Hank Aaron.
Ken Griffey,
and
in 2.
Right,
I mean,
Griffey
Ken Griffey
and Willie Mays, and so many people been unanimous and weren't. So I do think Jeter will get in at 100%.
Okay. Ian O'Connor here on The Rich Eisen Show. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rich.
You bet. That's Ian O'Connor.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.